how can we normalize the stories that people don't want to talk about, the stories that maybe most people feel it doesn't happen to, it's I'm the only person who's struggling with it, and we know that's not true. And so I started to find myself on a mission of normalizing these kinds of stories, sharing vulnerable stories, putting it out there, and all of a sudden recognizing that your story can be a guide for someone else.
Hello, I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from downtown Prince George, British Columbia. Prince George, obviously British Columbia is in Canada for our international guest, and Prince George is about 800 kilometers north of Vancouver. A beautiful, beautiful area. It is in the middle, right in the middle of British Columbia, big province, but Prince George is very nice. Today it was about 2 below, so winter is around the corner, and no snow yet. We have lots of animals around here. We got deer, we got moose, we got bears, and all of that, all interacting with people. A beautiful, beautiful place. Today a very special guest. Her name is Marsha, and Marsha spent 25 years to be a genealogist. I hope I got that correct, and a personal trainer. And we'll talk about her and a very interesting story. She is also an author. Marsha, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
So now you are in Ontario, and you said just what, south of Toronto. What was the place again? You said
It's Kitchener-Waterloo, and it was 19 degrees today for us, which is insane for the end of October.
considering it should be more or less in the low
It
teens,
was,
right?
yeah, and it was like yesterday it was 0 and cold, and today it was 19. So that's a glimpse of what our weather could be like.
Yeah, but we're close to November. Not exceptional, really. But so tell us a little bit about yourself. You have a very interesting story. You are a trainer. You are especially speaking about your life and your past. So, and you wrote about yourself and your past. So share that with us, or at least a part of all of that.
Absolutely. So I spent 27 years as a registered kinesiologist. I help people to rehab from post surgery, learn how to walk again, learn how to, you know, overcome their fears when it comes to dealing with pain and difficulties. And I did that. That was a job that I loved. I put a lot of heart and time into. And when I can look back at it now, I recognize how I've been coaching and supporting people for like many, many decades. And I was in a space probably about 12 years ago where we started to experience teen substance abuse. As a parent, I was in a space of really feeling myself shrinking down small and, hiding, shame taking over, and really finding myself stuck in a story. And through a lot of work, a lot of support, a lot of counseling, a lot of, messy, messy work, I found myself in a space of sharing my personal story on a small stage that continued to grow in a couple of collaborative books, eventually into my own book, and releasing a podcast back in 2017 because I felt this call to how can we normalize the stories that people don't want to talk about, the stories that maybe most people feel it doesn't happen to, it's I'm the only person who's struggling with it, and we know that's not true. And so I started to find myself on a mission of normalizing these kinds of stories, sharing vulnerable stories, putting it out there, and all of a sudden recognizing that your story can be a guide for someone else. And it just continued to grow in many different ways. And then in 2020, when the pandemic happened, my 27-year career, my identity and my full-time job was gone overnight and it never came back. And it was a moment of sitting there thinking, I wasn't sure what to do with it. Yet at the same time, I remember thinking, well, I prayed for time to work on building my own thing, my own business, and I went all in. And while I went all in, I was also in a time of waiting for some medical tests, knowing that something was going on, but not knowing what it was. And found out in August of that year that I had to have a fairly comprehensive back surgery. And now I have lots of titanium in me, lots of my spine was rebuilt. And I often say that my 27 years as a kinesiologist trained me to know what to do to rehab myself as I learned how to walk again. And so that was 2020, and it's just continued to grow since then. Now I've really incorporated the tools of neurolinguistic programming and understanding how my brain works and being able to now train others how to use those tools, which have been incredibly supportive in helping me to heal myself with everything that I've come through. And I get to be on multiple podcasts as well as continue to grow my own show. And I help people to write and share their vulnerable stories. So it's one of those things when you look back, the dots really do all connect. You just don't see it when you're in it.
So in 2000, you were into being a genealogist and a trainer for 27 years. Then 12
A
years.
kinesiologist. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I may not quite say it,
You're right.
but yeah. So then 12 years before that, you started to realize that there was something happening to you, right? What was that, or how did it? Another question I was going to ask, if you don't mind. You're a parent, right? You have how many children do you have?
Two grown boys,
Boys? What are the
grown
names?
men.
What are their names? I
Mhm.
always find it interesting to know the names. And how old are they?
Cameron, Cameron and Andrew, they're 25 and 26.
Amazing, eh? Oh
Mhm.
my God.
I know.
Yeah.
I
So
know.
yeah, and so then 12 years ago something happened. 12 years at 27. That must have been then. Was it 2008 or something like
So
that?
12 years from now.
Oh,
Like, so from,
okay.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
2011 or so. Something happened, or so. What was happening that triggered things that put you on a different path?
All I can say is that when you're raising teens and you're dealing with some experimentation, you're dealing with substances, and it for us it was never a case of, it never felt like experimenting. It came into our life and it literally just stayed and it only grew. It was not a stage like some parents went through, and for us it eventually impacted and affected like every area of our life, every single area of our life. And it took a tremendous toll on all of us as we tried to navigate this time during. And this is where it's hard because it's an international show, but how Canada deals with certain things as far as substance and youth is very different than how some other countries deal with it. And so here, it's almost a bit of a perfect storm because during that period of time, schools, it didn't matter if they weren't going to school; they were still passing. And it didn't matter if they were, as far as police were concerned, if they were under 18, then they were kids. And, it's a phase, they'll grow out of it. But the problem is then when all of a sudden they're hitting 18 years old and now you treat them like an adult, but there's been no learning curve in there. Like there's just no human who's going to learn something without a consequence. There isn't. There's no human who's going to learn anything without a consequence. So it felt like a perfect storm because the only people who had an issue with what was happening was mom and dad. And so I felt like we were fighting an entire system, is what I felt like. So we ended up very much working on trying to get as much support as we could and figuring out how to handle this because there's no playbook, rule book for parenting, period. There definitely wasn't one for what we were walking through. And it was through that process of figuring out, wait, our story was actually way more relatable than I thought.
So, looking back, you felt now or even then that we, as in Canada, are not as progressive on dealing with those realities as probably some other countries would be. Maybe more or less
Yeah.
say that is you're on your own.
Yes. And as far as the other piece of that Canada can do, I can't speak 100% if it's exactly like that now. I believe that it is. But, even as far as teens go, you can't even make a doctor's appointment for them. They have to book that themselves.
Right.
So if you're talking about, young teens, young kids who are going through challenging time and they you can't make anything happen, it's very your hands are very tied as a parent with how do I navigate this, because it just we felt like we were very much on our own.
So, and that became very, very difficult in your life, right? So,
Very.
and then obviously, I'm hoping that things now they're over 25, that things have
Mhm.
normalized, but still looking back, it taught you a lot of things, not helpful necessarily, but it made you more understanding of some of the areas that were happening in other people's life, with
Mhm.
then in the same position as you were, with no place to go, which can be very destructive to families,
Yes.
relationships, and everything gets adversely
Yeah.
affected by it, right?
Yes, 100% agree. It taught me the power of empathy and understanding. Like we never know somebody's story. It's very easy, I find, especially in the world of social media right now, that it's easy to look at somebody's, 30-second video and make an opinion of where they are, what they're doing, how they're like. We don't know somebody's story. We never know somebody's story. And I always say that, the second you think you know someone's story, you don't. You see what they're letting you see. And it really helped me to learn that, I mean, everybody's walking through something. And I think that we could become much better humans if we could appreciate that everybody is walking through something challenging. And the other thing this really taught me was that, we all have those parts of ourselves, these stories, whether they're shame stories or whatever you want to call them, these parts of ourselves that we hope that others don't see. We think that they are the pieces of our story that people will judge us for, the things that people will look down on us for, when actually they're the parts of our story that make us the expert. We walked through something, we've walked through challenges, and they also are the most relatable parts of ourselves. Like this is how we connect with others. So I learned so many of those lessons during that time. And I think the other big eye opener for me was that my story connected with so many other people, and even people who weren't walking in my story. I think that was my biggest eye opener. I thought it was going to only connect with people who had walked in my story, but it's not. We're humans who are experiencing very similar feelings, situations, and emotions. So even if our stories are different, we can still see ourselves in each other's stories because we recognize those emotions, those experiences, what people are walking through. So I really found that through this process, we're far more connected by our stories than what we think we are.
Yeah. and part of it is also not only here, but likely also in other places, different in some areas, but saying that these days in particular, we try so hard to be perfect, especially when we're younger and we don't get that encouragement. And that applies to
Yes.
boys as well as to girls, as that
Yes.
with boys, they're not smart enough, they are not this, they're not learning well enough, or they don't look good, or physically, or they don't have the right clothes, or not a good taste, or other issues that we do to ourselves. And then with a lot of women, girls, with all due respect, a lot of times they feel they are not beautiful enough, or they're not being judged for this or all the other things. And I always say, I went through this, give you just a little bit of background on myself. I was born in 1940, November the 1st, 1940. So I'm going to be 83 next week, I think. But I'm lucky.
Okay.
I
You.
intend
I love it.
I intend to be grow up to 120, So and then I try to stay in shape. I'm fit. I go to the gym and stay mentally, physically in shape. But it took me a long time to get here because I was born during the war, the Second World War, obviously, and I was born. Our family was in northeastern Holland. We see Belgium, obviously, and then Holland is relatively small, as you well know. And the
Yes.
northeastern part is about 20 minutes away from the German border. We were invaded by the German armies, the Blitzkrieg, in April of 1940. My dad was drafted into the Dutch army in April, and the last time they heard from him is when the bombing took place of Rotterdam. And then for 5 years they didn't know if he was dead or alive. And so my mother had three children. My sister was 1 year old, the brother is 2 years older, and they had a tough time then. I was born November the 1st, and then we were liberated by the Canadian Army April the 12th, 1945. And from that point forward, it made an immense impression on me. From that point forward, I always knew I would go to the land of my heroes, Canada. It was just not when, but it was not if, but when. And I tried to go when I was 17, was drafted into the Dutch Air Force, and then was there for 30 months. And then when I was 24, I worked in a lumber mill during the period. I'll tell you a little bit why. And then I went to Canada when I was 24 for two reasons, actually. The one was that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to go to the land of my heroes. The other reason was that some things happened during the war years, and so appropriate these days. Remembrance Day, I've always, for the last 10 years, have spoken at least 2, 3, 4 schools during that week about why should we know why the 2 minutes of silence, and how important it is, and how important it is to realize how fortunate we are in Canada and compared to some of the rest of the world. And I found it always important to talk about my upbringing and and how difficult, how everything can change overnight. Obviously, what we see now, the Ukraine, Israel, and all those other kind of places. But so again, this year I'll be speaking to at least 2 schools here in this area, and probably another 1 or 2 in Vancouver. But to me, it's always important to talk about that, how things will change and families will change and how it will affect you, and how lucky we are here and not take it for granted that we have all the things that we have. The other part was important to me is there was a fear because my mom was on her own having 3 small children, that the fear of losing the mother, because you were all on your own. There was no, everybody had the same issues, same problems. Not enough to eat, nothing to keep you warm, and then anxiety. So it affected me in terms of and got counseling for the inner child, actually when it was in my late 50s. very
Oh,
emotional, as you know. And then the other thing,
mhm.
PTSD affected me from we saw far too much during the end of the world and of the end of the war in April 1945. Without going into all the details, but it got pretty rough around where we were, and so the other part was for me that. I was not very good academically. I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 7 3 times. And, so I kind of felt like I had failed because in Holland it is like this that that I was going to school till I was 14, and then all my friends were going to either college or to university. I became a laborer. I got a job in a furniture factory, and kids are hard on each other, right? So
Oh,
you
yeah.
were no longer part of that group, and so and then the I want then kind of dealing with that, I kind of felt I had been a failure because at some point you're going to get married and then you get a good job, hopefully, in a house. And then,
Mhm.
but what happened in Holland is that you apply for a job, the first thing they say to you is, okay, and where are your diplomas? Well, I had no diplomas. So, and I felt I had failed, and I had the dream of going to Canada, obviously, but the other one is going to BC and build a lumber mill because my grandfather was a master carpenter and my dad managed a small lumber mill, and I wanted to show and prove to myself that I could do it. I was as good as all the others, and so I then left Holland in July of 1965, and I was 24 years old. Took one suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and $150, and I was going to go to Canada and to BC. I could speak the language, didn't know a soul, didn't have a job, and so when I came, and then I came to Vancouver, and you can relate to Vancouver. So I went to the
Yeah.
immigration office there, and then fortunately I ran into a German fellow, and I could speak some German. And I told him what I wanted to do, and he said, I told him I wanted to build a lumber mill. He said, Prince George, go to Prince George. So that's what I did. And when I came off the bus here in Prince George, my employees made this for me actually. I had $25.47. And
Oh, I love
I
that.
had no job, couldn't speak the language, didn't know a soul. But what I did have, I had attitude. To me, the glass is always half full. I'm
Yeah.
always an optimist. Even then, I had passion. Whatever I do, I give it all that I got. And work ethic, I work harder than anybody else. And that's what I had. And then started as cleanup man. And then, anyway, a number of years later, I have my own lumber mill now and a number of other companies and all of that sort of thing. And then what I found important, people have said to me, you have to write a book. And so for quite a while I did that, and I thought about doing that, and then I started writing books is not easy, as you know, and
No.
and so I for 20 years I started and then stopped and started, and then about 5 years ago I thought if I don't do it now, it will never happen. So I
Mhm.
did, and I wrote an autobiography. I'm going to send it to you, sign it for you, and it's against all odds. And that
Oh, I love that.
and it's not about hoorah, hoorah, how successful John is, but in spite of it all, and to going through all the ups and downs, staying the course, attitude, passion, work ethic, so that's the book, very popular, amazingly. And then the other thing that happened to me that I had to tell you, and for a little bit of background, so I still have felt, even people said to me, oh, you're so successful, you have this company and that company, and I felt no. Still felt I had failed. And then one day I walked into a store, January 1997, I walked into the store and I opened this book, Driven to Distraction, and it said ADHD. And I said, oh my God, that's me. And as I stood there and went through the book further and further and further, finally the guy came in and I said, are we going to buy it? No, not quite. But anyway, I did buy it. I still have it. I wrote in the book in Dutch. Now I finally know who I am. Because I didn't want to write it in English because I was ashamed of it. And, and then it took me 5 years even before I went to my doc, who was a personal friend of ours, of my family, and had delivered our two daughters. And he said to me, why are you here, John? I said, I think I got ADHD. So we kind of looked it all up, and yeah, I do, yeah. So then it took me quite a number of years until I kind of started reading more about it and understanding more about it. And rather than being a disorder or a liability, it's an asset. It's what I call a superpower. And I became a professional on-demand speaker, which I do a lot, and then I became a writer, and I wrote another book on ADHD, and here is the one.
I love it.
ADHD Unlocked, and I'm being much more vocal about it, but the unfortunate part about it, Marsha, is that, for all these years, even with all the things that I had done, it explained a lot of the things that happened to me. I felt I'd been a failure. And it had to take nearly till I was 62 until I got diagnosed by my doc and I started understanding it, that I knew that does not mean that I felt totally bad about it, but I still didn't feel, but it kind of unlocked something because now I knew what had happened. And I became much more vocal about things, about the inner child, about PTSD, and about all the other things that are so important in your life, and saying, that. And if you read my book, which you will, Against All Odds, then you will see I wrote about it all, the ups, the downs, and going through all the challenges. And then the other part that I always felt, a lot of people are not happy about what they are doing. They don't have that, or they're trying to find a job, they don't know what, or they have a job and they don't like it. And I say, if you don't find something or change it, because it becomes you and you take it home with you, it affects everything around you. So I wrote this book, came out in July, send you a copy of this too, Finding Your Passion, Living the Dream.
Oh, I love it.
And then saying, okay, John, are you living the dream? I sure am. And then the other part that I'm obviously doing is, being a speaker as well, and I love that. And then the other one being a podcaster and being able to do precisely. That's why I kind of want to share that with you, because in a different way, I do what you are doing. I'm sharing with all of those that have the feeling that they are not good enough or that is something wrong with them. And I say, no, you are unique and you have to come at peace with who you are, because you're special. Every single one of us is,
Oh, thank you for sharing everything with me. Like I'm so I think your story is incredibly powerful and it's so much to share. And I feel it's not very often that I get to have a conversation with a man who is open about talking about the PTSD and the inner child work. And that work was eye opener for me. So different story, but I spent most of my life as the perfectionist who, just had to figure things out on her own and didn't ask for help. And I'm pretty sure I have a couple of pretty big learning disabilities I should probably look at, but it was never talked about when I was a kid. And so I masked it with perfectionism And I pushed and pushed and pushed and worked super hard. Those work ethics served me very well until, I always say, our strengths become our weakness. They eventually only take us so far. And when we started to deal with all of the challenges in our family, I took it personally. I don't know how else to say this except that as a mom, I thought I failed. I thought I had failed. My job was to stop this. And so I thought I had failed. And when I started to put my, learning how to share my story and speak and put myself out there, it really helped me to connect with so many different people. And it helped me to realize that I wasn't alone. And I'm fully transparent in that I skipped a lot of steps of healing, a lot. I just because I put into my old traits of put my head down and just push through, write the book, do the thing, speak on stages, and really put myself out there to connect with others. But in the process of not doing some of that healing work, not diving into the inner child work, I was having a really hard time receiving. I was having a really hard time allowing myself to fully be seen. And I remember the first time I did do an inner child session, and I honestly walked into it thinking, all right, well, this is sure, I'll do it. I mean, I hear it's good. We'll try it. It broke me the first time. Like I broke open in ways that I did not ever anticipate,
Me too.
and it like knocked me. It was I did not, you
All
got
of
your
those.
picture, and I'm looking at myself at that age. The second I looked at it, all I could see was this 7-year-old version of myself who completely looked lost.
Yeah.
She looked sad, really
Yeah.
sad, not
Yeah.
connected, not all those things. And that was a moment, and that was 2020. That was the moment where I was like, okay, Marsha, it's time to actually learn more about this for yourself. You have got to do this. And so the last 3 years of doing this work and understanding, I love this conversation because this is not the kind of thing that I always get to talk about, but I think it's incredibly important. Doing this work helped me to recognize that, yes, I did have PTSD. I did have incredibly difficult experiences that I had just shoved down and just tried to put my head down and work through. But I never gave myself a chance to feel. I never gave myself a chance to, feel those emotions. It wasn't safe to feel them. And if you can't feel them, you can't release them,
No.
and they hold on to you, right? And so I would say the last 3 years have been some of the most uncomfortable experiences going through and processing some of this. But at the same time, I like to tell people, like, I'm 53, I'm going to be 54, and we're never too old or too young to change. We're never too old to learn a new way. Never, like ever. And I just think it's really powerful to have these conversations, especially in a time where, as you're sharing, we're being exposed to images and like actual war happening that we're seeing in lifetime moments. That's a lot to take in and see, and as you know firsthand. And so if we're not going to openly have conversations or allow ourselves to, you know, explore and feel these emotions, how do we process that and just like turn it off and go about our day? We just, like, that's actually scary to think that we're doing that. So I think these conversations are actually incredibly important.
You see, the thing that's very important, and thank you for sharing all of that with me, is that if you look at it, Marsha, like I was 5 years old when the war ended. I still
Yeah.
remember hundreds of planes in the air. I was only 3.5, 4 years old. I find it amazing. I look at my grandchildren and I say, I know it in my mind. I will never forget it from that point forward. And that will stay with you and it will form who you are. Because up to the time that you are 5, 6, 7 years old, the other thing that people forget or don't know about is if the war, hopefully it all ends, but if the war ends, that does not mean that everything ends. It just for families, like finally my dad came back after 5 years and he was underground in
Oh,
southern
wow.
Holland, But the relationship never was the same again because he had been gone for 5 years. He had been exposed to, nearly got killed several times, and so was not very good at communicating PTSD, and he became a closet alcoholic that could not share his emotions because men don't, right? Say that is
Right.
not being a man. I don't agree with that. In fact, to the
I
contrary.
don't either.
But the other part that I find interesting about you in particular, you're a very good communicator, and and bits is very, very important for what you do. And I want to tell you something about that as well. I'll share with you something with me is that I was not a very good communicator, and right up to 1990, I was already successful. I had businesses, and everybody said, "Oh, you're so successful." All the other things. I had difficulty. I could interact with 3 or 4 people in my operations, but as soon as it was outside of that, I was not very good at interacting with people. And then my ex-sister-in-law dragged me to, she said, "You have to come with me to Toastmasters, you like it." Toastmasters. And I said, "What are they doing there?" She said, "Well, you can just sit there and watch it." I said, "Okay, as long as they don't ask me nothing." No, it's not going to happen. So I sat down there, and I was sitting there, and then in the middle of the meeting, somebody said, "So, John, tell us a little about it." I said, "Oh my God, I'm out of here," right? So I'll never go back here. So I stayed there for 10 years. And I became a
Wow.
distinguished Toastmaster, the highest level in Toastmasters. Toastmasters probably in North America and around the world, probably at any particular time has 450, 500,000 people actively in Toastmasters. And then probably 5 to 10 million Toastmasters have had experience with Toastmasters. Becoming a DTM is less than 1% that goes so far as that. For whatever personal reasons they have. But for me, it helped me to become, it unlocked me in terms of other things. As you said, like then, it was already 2000 because in 1990 I became a Toastmaster till 2000, and then I started to become more involved in public speaking. I created that confidence that I did not have before. Although I was already successful, I had this, that, but I didn't feel that way. And then part of that, and then when I found the ADHD book, it kind of unlocked that, driven to distractions. Now the amazing part is how the world turns around. Was written by Dr. Hollywell, wrote the book Driven to Distractions. So he contacted me a couple of weeks ago. He wants to be on my podcast. So
Oh, I love it.
I'll probably have him on here in the next couple of weeks or so. But anyway, so it was because I talk about it all the time in terms of what it meant to me, is sharing with the people, saying that, well, you're so lucky you probably had all these things, all these good things happen, and so the reason that I'm like this or whatever is because you were lucky here and you did this. And I said, no, that's not the way it works. It served me, but I stayed the course. What I have is that attitude. I always get up at 5:30 in the morning, and I always think I'm late. And then I always make my bed. And then every day I go to work, I enjoy, most of the time, what I do. And I'm always looking forward. I have the passion. If I do lumber, I'm writing book, I'm interacting with you, I give public presentations, whatever I do, I enjoy. And then work ethic. I work hard, and it makes me feel good, and that's what I do. And so it's not because, oh, you probably had your university education. No, I had grade 7 3 times. And so, and so what has become important, more than all of that, is saying, be at peace with who you are. You are unique, you are special in what you are. We all are special in what we do. And then look at the bright side. Don't, some people are perpetual complainers. Try not to be. Find the better things in life because it makes your life so much interesting. So, and that's usually what I do. Then I do keynote presentations. I usually give it all that I got, and I, in spite of, without Toastmasters, I would not have been able to do that.
But thank you for sharing that. I think that the really important part there is that it's easy for people to think, well, that's easy for you because you're successful and you're strong. And it's like, no, like think back to the very first time you went to a Toastmasters and it was like, please don't ask me to talk. And so it's interesting because people will say to me all the time, well, you're so strong. This was easy for you because you were strong to get through it. And I'm like, first off, none of this was easy. Like you telling yourself that it was easy for me is you don't know my story. Like it was one of the hardest things I've ever walked through. Second, I've had to unlearn a lot of things. I had to unlearn a lot of things, and it's not easier because somebody is strong. It's not easier because somebody is successful. It's being willing to do the work that is hard and is messy and is like going first before you're ready. I've had a conversation with somebody who I'm working with who really wants to get or gain the confidence to speak. And she even said, I love her to pieces. And she was like, when is it going to show up? And I'm like, well, how long have you been waiting for it to show up? And she was like, well, most of my life. And I said, so when is it coming then? Like it doesn't show up. You actually forge it. It's a muscle. You build it, you create it. You have to do the things first. And the beautiful thing about recognizing that is that means it's available for all of us, right? It's not like, yes, we are all born with certain traits and certain gifts, and we have a lot of challenges that we have to unlearn at the same time, but it's all available for us. We just have to be willing to do the work, but also more than just do the work. I think it's really important to do the work to look at the parts of ourselves that we maybe want to better on, improve on, connect with others on. So it's like being able to look at, when I took those last 3 years and looked at the parts of myself and went, wow, this is actually where I have the room for the most growth. And as messy and as difficult as some of those steps are, it really is the most fulfilling, because I often say, like, you are your business at all times. So if you really want to find a way to improve your business, yes, there's strategy in your business, but understanding how our mind works and our subconscious mind being formed like up into the age of 7, we are literally adults out here who are being run by our inner child.
Exactly.
We're being run by our inner child.
Yeah.
And so it's really important to do that inner work. That's where the peace comes from. That's where
Exactly.
peace, fulfillment, all of those pieces come from.
You're absolutely right, Marsha, because if I look back, as you said, up to the age of 7, for me it was war, and
Right?
everything around me was like that. And then the other thing that was doing the hard way is that I knew I had, at least in my mind, failed, but I knew I could do it. So I went to Canada, start with nothing, just a suitcase and two sets of clothes, and start as a cleanup man and all of the other things, build a company. And then, even then, when I went to Toastmasters in 1990, that I've, since that time, in the 10 years that I was at Toastmasters, reached the very, very top. I saw hundreds of people that went to the Toastmasters the first time, and they feared it, because the greatest fear in life is public speaking. I had never seen anybody that was as fearful as me. Never. Because I could have crawled out of there. That's how but I did it. I stayed the course, as you were saying. And then the other one, that I grew up in northeastern Holland. We speak dialect there. We can't even speak High Dutch. So I had to acquire High Dutch as rather than speaking dialect. And then with my grade 7, I come to Canada here, and then I'm a good author. as you will see once you see my books.
Mhm.
And all of that is a quiet, and I've always been a good writer, and I've been good at numbers. And all of that is, I could have easily said, well, I can never be anything because I didn't have this, or I can't do that. No, you can do anything. And then when everything has been difficult along the way, and I like it that way because it challenged me to get to where I am today, and then look back and say, was it worth it? Absolutely. And then, are you at peace with yourself? I am. Now I have to give back, and that's why I'm so open and so candid about it in my books and in publications that I do, and that I want to share with other people and saying, no, because I did it, and I'm not saying hoorah, hoorah, and I'm sharing it with them. It gives them hope in saying, yes, you can. And then with those young people that think they don't look well enough, or they this or that, no, be the uniqueness about that person is the individual. It's not about what you wear. It's not about exactly how you look.
No.
You're all beautiful and you're all pretty. And be at peace with yourself, because that's what brings you success. And success is creating that individual that becomes an inspiration to others. And that's available to all of
Beautifully
us.
said. It is 100% available to all of us. And I think it is exactly as you're saying. I feel like there's a common theme and mission between us in the sense that, once I found myself working through our story and finding a way to show up and allow myself to be seen. I often share this story, but I said to a counselor that, no matter where I go, I can't find anybody talking about this kind of story. Like, it feels like we must be the only people in the world who are struggling with it, which I knew we weren't, but it felt like it. And she said, maybe that's because you're supposed to. And I remember thinking, well, that's ridiculous. And wait a minute, what if it's not? Like, what if it's not? And all of a sudden, what that does in our mind, so when we start to open up to possibilities and we come into what if questions, or like, what could we create? You open up possibilities. I remember this light bulb moment thinking, what if I could do something good with the worst experience I've ever walked through? What would that feel like? And all of a sudden it was like, well, that could be amazing. Like, that would be great if I could do something good with it. And I think that's what we want to do is when it feels like there is no possibilities, even coming down to our language and what we're speaking and how we're saying things, we can change that, because our thoughts literally do become our world. And when we start to change our language and open it up to possibilities, it is really powerful when you can take something difficult that you've walked through and you can pay it forward and help others in ways that you wished you would have had that support. You wish you would have had that communication. Like I often say, we are all walking around perfectly designed to help a younger version of ourselves, all of us.
Yeah.
And so why not step forward and try and do something good with that?
Exactly. And I agree with that 100%. To do that is the reward that is rewarding to you, but also to others. And that's what I found. And then, even at my age now, at 83, I still am very active. I'm very active, obviously, in
Right.
podcasting. I'm very active in writing. I'm very active in speaking and the companies and say, I want to be an inspiration to others and say, look what he is doing. Why aren't you? And then in the next week or so, 2 weeks, when I'm speaking at the different schools here and being able with them, very emotional for me actually, but
Of course.
sharing with them that time, is important.
I thank you for still doing that, because I think it's so incredibly important. I don't know what the conversations are in schools now, and I hope they're still having these conversations, because I think it's incredibly important. Again, we're seeing access to it like right on our phones, and we're seeing this. And I think it's so, having the conversations and recognizing that, that's something you lived through, something you experienced, and what you're doing with it now. I think it's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, and it's very rewarding for me because it's amazing the schools, even right up to I did a couple in Vancouver, and there were 600 or 700 people. Then I rushed back to Prince George and did another 600 or 700, and then a smaller school, and a lot of the parents were there, and they are very interested in it. You could hear a pin drop, and I love it, and I really get involved in it, and but I believe it's very, very important.
I do. I think this is coming back to the same piece that we are so much more connected. We're so much more alike than what we think, and we can learn from each other. And if you think about it, like it's the parts of ourselves that we think are not relatable, that we think are our shame stories, the things that we feel the most ashamed for. And the only reason shame continues to grow is because we don't give it a voice. Shame loves
Exactly.
secrecy. It loves it. So when you start openly sharing and you're talking about this, like it's interesting because you can help so many other people and it continues to be healing for you in the process. Right?
Exactly.
That's what I have found is doing
Yeah.
it. It's like I love being able to help others. I didn't know it was going to become such a path of healing for me, and then it would help me to like just build a better relationship with my kids than I ever would have ever expected or hoped for. And so I think this comes down to one thing I want to share is there's so many times people ask me, how do I get them to change this behavior? How do I get them to stop doing what they're doing? How do I get them to listen? And I often say, I know it's really difficult to hear. You don't. You
Yeah.
don't. It's actually not your job to get someone else to stop doing or to do something.
Be
It's
an
your job
example
to
to
lead
them.
yourself. Yes, to lead yourself and be that best version. And when I started to do that, because my podcast is called Own Your Choices, Own Your Life, because once I started to own my own choices and take responsibility for myself, that's when my life changed. And when my life started to change, the relationships around me started to change because I was becoming a different person. And
Yes.
so you might not always, but you can affect and impact the people around you by not trying to change anyone, but by
Exactly.
trying to be your best version.
Exactly. I agree with that 100%. You know,
Yeah.
the other thing, Marsha, is that, so what are you doing now? You're writing, you wrote a book, or what are you doing on that area?
So I've published 7 times. My solo book is called When She Stopped Asking Why.
Okay.
And I have led 2 collaborative books where I have helped authors learn how to write and share their vulnerable stories and publish them. And then right now, in the last year, I have just had so many different people approach and ask the question, how do you share a vulnerable story though? Like I want to know how to do it and leave people in integrity, because when people do read my book, it's always interesting because I think they're expecting to hear and see a lot of the gory sides of dealing with substance abuse and addiction. And it's not that. It's a story about me as a mom. So, how do you share a story and leave everyone in integrity? And that was something I just kept getting asked over and over. So, this year I really dove in to helping people to learn how to share that vulnerable, difficult story that they've held on to. They don't know how to put it out into the world, and we've branched into publishing as well. So I help people with getting their book out into the world, publishing it, going through all of those pieces. And I also at the same time built my own coaching certification, and it's called Outspoken. So I teach people how to become NLP practitioners, understand how their brain works, how to heal, how to work through a lot of those tools. And in a beautiful way, they both complement each other. Learning, because writing is a, how do I say this? We for so long we thought writing was just strategy, right? Like build the strategy, write the book, put it out in the world. When you're sharing a vulnerable story, strategy is still only going to take you so far, because if you don't feel safe to allow yourself to be seen and share your story in that, then you're going to get a surface level book. And so taking those tools helps people to learn how to share more of themselves and their vulnerable story. So I'm like knee deep in stories and sharing them and teaching people how to do it. and then podcasting as well. Lots of podcasts.
So what I do with the books is I'm a storyteller.
Yep.
That's what I do. And the same
Yep.
I do when I do presentations. I'm a storyteller, and
Same.
I love to do presentations, and and that's what I do. And then obviously we do the same, interacting on our podcasting, and
Yes, we do.
so, and it comes natural to me because I feel very close to you. I do, and
Yeah.
be connect, and
Yes, we do.
and so I'm gonna make sure I'm gonna sign these books and then send them to you. This podcast will be out tomorrow, Andrew. Tomorrow morning, yeah, you'll see it tomorrow morning,
I will share it happily.
and it will not get edited. The only time when we were considering editing, we had an earthquake just when I introduced my guest, and we left it in the podcast. Actually.
I love that.
Yeah. So
I don't love you had an earthquake, but I love that you left it in the podcast.
I lived here for 60 years, and it's only the second time. The one time I didn't feel it because I was in my car, relatively minor. And the other one happened last year. I think it was 1.6 into the building. I said, oh, and I was just introducing my guest, and so we left it in there, so
Perfect.
yeah.
I love it.
So Marsha,
I love
anything else that comes to mind as we getting close to our end of our discussion?
I think the big thing that I would just say is for anybody who's listening, like just build off of our belief, yours and mine together, that like your story, you can share parts of yourself
Yeah,
and build connection. Like here's it. We've been having a conversation for an hour. I feel very connected. I feel I can relate and connect to you and your story, even though we don't have the same story, a lot of the same emotions, a lot of the same experiences,
absolutely.
and we're taking that story and doing something really good out in the world. I'm not special. Like, we're not special. We just decided to do something with it. So if you're listening to this and it speaks to you, just take this as proof that, you know what, we're all here with a very unique set of gifts, a unique set of stories, and we can all do incredible work that lights us up and leads us to a lot of fulfillment and peace.
And that's what I say to people in a general sense. We are all unique and special in our own
Yeah.
way, and have that confidence. And it doesn't mean this is wrong with me. And no, we are all so special, and we can make things happen, and then enjoy life. Because it is so precious.
So precious. Honestly, I've absolutely loved this time in this conversation. This has just been a very special interview. So thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Marsha. And you take care now, and I'll send the books out tomorrow.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Marsha. Take care.